Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. That's Māori for hi everybody, welcome. And especially welcome Jason McLennan. Hey, thanks Jason for joining us. It's great of you to give up your time to have a bit of a chat about some of these issues. And it's always nice to sort of meet up again. I remember when we first met at the conference in, I think it was Portland, wasn't it?
Yeah.
2014? Yeah. So welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to come back to that conference because there were some interesting things that came up, which is still ongoing out of that. But maybe let's start talking about something that's really kind of common to both of us, and that's the role that nature plays in our work. I often get asked, the classic question is, oh, what is your inspiration, or where do you get your inspiration from? And it kind of sort of annoys me a little bit because it makes it very superficial, but the obvious answer is nature. And then you sort of go on and talk about how I interact with nature. So what, for you, how would you explain the importance of the role of nature within your work and within everybody's lives?
Yeah, well, you know, it really depends on what it is we're talking about. And I think, yeah, the easy answer is nature, right? That's the easy answer. But of course, that's sort of a level one type answer. And the truth is that that it's always about context. And if it's a product, the context is very different than if it's a whole building or if it's a whole community design. And you can't escape the fact that we should be responding very differently to context than we do typically in Western design thought. So we look to nature, of course, very directly, but we look to climate, we look to human culture and context of the legacy of people in a particular place. Lots of issues, but part of the whole idea is that we're listening to the information that is around us already, that surrounds us, and we should be paying more close attention to. And I'm sure it's similar for you.
Yeah, it is. And I think at the moment, I'm so fascinated by the stories I'm hearing. Yesterday, I was talking to a lady in New York, and she said that they've been in lockdown for 2 months. They're going to be another 2 months after that. So they're working from home. And during that time, that there's this kind of need that people are sort of realizing for nature. There was an outcry in London when parks were closed because people needed to get out into sort of see some trees and get out from their little box apartments. And I think that one thing that I'm seeing is that people are realizing much more the importance of nature in our lives. And I think that's wonderful because I'm sure you do as well. But one of my sort of main driving forces with what we're doing with the design is to bring nature into people's homes, bring aspects of nature like these patterns and shadow patterns that kind of enrich the environments in which we live. I was thinking about the bowerbird last night, the Australian bird that builds these beautiful nests, and the male decorates the nest with all these bright colored baubles to attract the female in. And I think we're starting to think of doing that for our homes, of bringing nature into our homes and doing the same sort of thing. And that is one role of us as designers, that we can do that. And that's what I really believe in is that I think we need to create nests, bowers, that now that we're spending more time at home.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think it's also always about understanding the principles that are found in nature and applying them. So sometimes it can be very literal, but other times, you know, it can be more about how it's performing and sort of performative characteristics of a space, and then ultimately connecting people directly to the outside, so that it isn't just always about trying to pull nature in. It's about getting us out into nature and not having barriers, you know, so it goes both ways.
Yeah, I've always felt that our Western culture has been too disconnected from nature. There's been this attitude that it's there for us to exploit, to control, rather than being a part of it. And I really respect and admire the indigenous cultures for whom nature is much more a living thing of which they are part. And I try and sort of direct my work to embracing some of those values. And I think I love that carpet you've got in the background there. Tell us the story of that one, because that's lovely.
Yeah, so this is actually our new carpet line that we designed with Mohawk, and it's the owl collection. And actually, if you were to travel through my whole office, you'd see different plumage patterns from different birds from different sort of ecoregions. And so this is the snowy owl, which, like me, is a Canadian bird, and very striking plumage. And so this really is, a good example, because we're not trying to directly copy nature, but we're trying to have people begin to understand and appreciate the nature that is around them, that might be indigenous to the region that they're in, and to get people to think differently about what they specify and why. And it's a redless free carpet, part of the Living Product Challenge protocol. So in terms of the chemicals used, it's healthier and lightweight and cleanable and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a good example of the thinking at a product level.
And also through nature, we connect to a sense of place, not sort of in a general sense of nature everywhere, but
right.
in like that snowy owl is your local owl. Yeah, and I think that's another important thing, that is making people respect the environment that they're in there and now, and connection to that much more.
Yeah, it's about having a relationship with nature, and I think that's kind of been one of the missing ingredients in design, because you can have natural patterns, you can mimic nature in certain ways, but the deeper level, which we are really beginning to explore, is what does it mean to have relationship with, not only relationship with other people, which is obvious, but relationship with a place, relationship with a particular sort of set of weather patterns, and something that grounds you in a particular moment in time and a particular place, particular species. And that's really important to get at. And it's not something that's really been talked about much, even in biophilia circles, this idea of relationship. And I think that's, inherent in your work as well. It's clear that you have a relationship to some of the species that have inspired you to design your fixtures. I know you have, from some of your stories, and it comes from familiarity. Relationship requires knowing the other. You mentioned that in your talk about the cave paintings, and it takes a hunter to know how to draw a lion, because you sort of understand the inherent nature. And you have a relationship, even if it might be one based on fear and survival. There is a relationship there. It's not abstract. And it's going past this idea of nature as abstraction to nature as personal. And that's what we need. That's what's healthy, because you don't destroy something that's personal to you. You don't, abuse it, at least in the same way, as if it's sort of, distant from you and not part of who you are as a person.
Do you think there's a sense that I've got this from just the recent sort of weeks, that it's almost like we're coming home.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of sort of finding our place back there again, and it's a sense of coming home.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've lost our way. It's like we've become aliens in our own homes. Because we've become like an invasive species,
Yeah. The pattern, the model of the indigenous cultures is so relevant, because they're using the environment, that they're living off the environment around them. Everything they need comes from that environment. Yeah. So they have to look after that, because if they take too much, they don't have anything tomorrow or the next day. So they're absolutely vital that they live in balance with that environment, and only take what's sustainable. Whereas we've kind of broken that mold, and we've now got to the point where we've realized we've gone too far, and we've got to kind of backtrack.
Yeah, no, and I don't know if you know the work of Wes Jackson here in the States. So he has a wonderful called Becoming Native to Place. And it is this concept of saying, everyone in some way starts out as an invasive species, but there's a choice that can happen where you become native to a place. And I think it's interesting. Again, I was thinking about your Living Future talk that I just watched, and you tell your story, and then I think it was your friend, was it Annie, and her story. Mm-hmm. And the Polynesians, when they first came to New Zealand, they were they were invasive. You know, they impacted the big birds there. They went extinct. But then over time, it became clear to them how to live in that place, and then it became their place, and they learned to sort of live in harmony with it until the Europeans showed up. And the difference is our culture has yet to learn how to be native to a place again. And so we haven't gone through that, you know. But it is the history of humanity where, you know, once we migrated out of Africa, we wrecked things along the way because we didn't understand how we fit. And then over time, every people began to learn how to fit into a place. And our society has yet to figure out that path. And so we're only in the destructive, invasive sort of path right now.
I guess because we were so successful at being destructive, we just carried on doing it.
Yeah, I guess that's probably right. It seems like it's working.
Can I come back to that that conference, 2014? One of the things that I remember so vividly from that was the keynote speech by McLennan. And she talked about a project she was working at the time at the mouth of the Columbia River. And it's a landscaping project because there's a bit of a scrotty park there, and she'd been asked to kind of landscape it. And she said that her kind of philosophy with that project was to make it look like I had not been there. And I think that's such a powerful statement. And this, again, comes back to what we're talking about with nature. It's like, it's not, she didn't want to impose herself on the environment. She wanted to enable what was there in a way that made it look like it had, something had happened. It was a beautiful place again, but there was no obvious imposition of a designer. And I think that one of the big faults of our Western design culture is this kind of sense of imposition of the designer from above, bringing something down into the environment rather than enabling, as a community, what's there to become more what it already is.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, McLennan has, of course, done a lot of inspiring things in her career all the way back to the Vietnam War Memorial, which I think changed the way people viewed memorials around the world. You know, certainly I agree. I resonate with this idea. And I think the problem is that designers have begun to think that they have to make a statement with every single thing they design. That there's sort of like this sort of, and then, you know, as you talk about, it leads to gimmicks. It leads to sort of false branding, sort of like that's the way, you know, it's like Frank Gehry buildings are all like crumpled paper things. It's like it then becomes devoid again of context and meaning. It becomes all about the brand and all about sort of something that's done just because, well, that's what I do, which is then that's about ego rather than what's needed. And I think for me, it's a little bit less about that you can't, I mean, nature does bold too, but it doesn't do bold everywhere all the time. I mean, so, you know, there are flowers for a reason, you know, but on the plant, there's a hell of a lot more plain leaves than the flower. You know, for every flower, there's 1,000 leaves, you know, so it's not that there can't be these sort of moments. It's just that it's cheapened and becomes about ego if people try to, you know, do it for everything, if you will. You know, am I making any sense?
Yeah. I mean, it's about community, isn't it? It's like nature. All of nature is these massive or small or whatever scale you look at it. There are communities, and they're all absolutely interrelated and mutually supporting. Nothing sort of, if something gets out of balance, then it disappears. And that kind of self-supporting community, I think, is the model that I think is so powerful for us as designers to help try and recreate of enabling communities rather than imposing that sense of ego. So when it comes down to the details, the sort of the individual choices, how do you kind of how do you implement that kind of philosophy into a design project?
Yeah, well, you know, I think it depends on what it is, but I always tell people to be humble 90% of the time and really bold 10% of the time. That's kind of a general rule and proportion here in terms of like you don't actually, you want to find a way to express yourself in moments, but they need to have meaning again. And most of the time, what you're really trying to do is be a member of a community. So if you're talking about buildings, you need to have good background buildings for every sort of museum thing that's out there, or you know, or it's a mess. You need to have simple details, simple materials, and you're not trying to do crazy things all the time. You just need it to work and make the whole better. And then find those moments where the impact is appropriate for what you're trying to do as a designer. That's one way of looking at it anyway. We could unpack this a million different ways.
And another thing that we were sort of going to discuss was this idea of storytelling, and what is the importance of storytelling within design, and why does it matter to you that you're telling stories?
Well, you're a great storyteller, so I like listening to your stories. But I think again, it's, you know, I think that I'm always looking for a way to bring meaning to design, again, to help people realize that there needs to be a reason for us to commit the world to our artifacts, whether it's a lighting design, whether it's a building design, that's a commitment. We're pulling materials out of the earth, we're impacting other species. And so there has to be an understanding of why and why it's necessary, and what is the life cycle of this object, at whatever scale it is, where does it come from? And what was the impact of getting the materials for it? And then what's its life cycle end? When it's done, where does it go? How does it break down? What is it food for? And if you don't use stories, people tune out. They need to understand, and just the nature of humans is you have to tell a story to get people to understand where they're plugging in that storyline, and to understand the part that they can play in being, you know, helping to be a co-author of that story, if you will. So that's you know why I use stories, and again, I'm always fascinated by your stories, David.
It's a kind of sense of connection, isn't it? That it allows the owner, the viewer, the person a way into the work. It's like you can just have an object which you take and you put there, and it's pretty and it's nice design, it looks good, but yep, it's just a widget, a thing. Whereas if it's got an embedded story, there's a sense of connection that you can make with it, and it gives it meaning, it gives it value. I mean, maybe if people come into a house which has got a light like this, and something, oh, what's that? And it's, oh, well, that's a light. It's designed. It's based on a sea urchin from the seas of New Zealand, and the pattern on the shell looks like this. And so they're proud of it. They're talking about it, and they're telling the story of it. And so it becomes more than just an object.
Yep.
And they value it more, and it enriches their lives more because of those stories of connecting them to the sea urchin in the sea.
Exactly.
And so on. And I think that's the other aspect that for me is important.
Oh, and that's why good design and beauty is important. As you say, beauty matters, and because it you know, not on a superficial level, but again imbued with meaning, that the people take care of the things they love and they appreciate. The environmental impact is typically lower when people care for something. It lasts longer. People will pass it down, and that goes again back to the, as you're saying, as sort of a theme here in some ways, is the current modality is to mass produce without care and without story, and it's just about the object, and it's kind of a one-liner, and that's why it's okay in people's minds to use it and throw it away. Yeah. I mean, because they're not connected anything upstream and downstream to the larger whole, and you can't be connected to the larger whole and think it's okay to throw something away. Or design something that has toxins in it that's going to harm life upstream or downstream. That's not okay anymore. Once you understand how anything that we design fits into the larger story, then it has power and meaning. And you know, that's, I think our job is, or anyone who's a designer, they have a much bigger responsibility than people realize. I think the average human being might consume a few things, but the designer is creating something for hundreds or thousands of people to consume. So it's a huge responsibility for a designer to be the one who's also a storyteller, that also helps people that buy their products understand the lineage that's there, the impact that the product has, because it's your damn fault that it's in the world. If you're
absolutely. Yeah, no, I've said that so many times that if there's something bad in a bad material or bad process in a thing, we are the ones who are responsible for that. We chose that material or that process or whatever. And if that's going out into the world, that is our responsibility, and we have to live up to that. And I think it's too easy in the kind of disassociated world in which we live, where everything comes from everywhere and moves around, that we don't take responsibility for things. It's, oh, it's somebody else. I just designed this pretty thing. You know, it's someone else's responsibility for them. It's not. We have to own all of that, and then we have to tell those stories. And so that brings in my team, I've got our sort of Ben, our marketing manager, whose main job is telling stories, you know, creating videos, photographs that not just a straight photograph, but an in situ photograph that says more about the piece. And so we have this much greater, I guess, burden on us now, that we don't just make stuff and send it out there. We've got to build this package around it, but that's such an important package, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's maybe more important than the thing.
yeah, and it's part of the design process, so that all the way through, you're that's maybe the story is where it starts, and the product comes along, and then that goes with it out into the world.
Yep, agreed.
We were sort of talking about maybe 20-30 minutes, and we've been going 25. Do you want to carry on a little bit, or do you want to?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Time flies with a good friend.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. I'm just going to have another look at the questions.
Yeah, did we have some questions that have come in from folks? I'm not so sure.
There was a lovely reference in your talk to a book you'd written called Zugenruhe, if I've said that right. It's this German word I never heard of before, but I was quite taken with that. And do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a really lovely concept that was new to me.
Yeah. Well, I happen to have the book here. Zugenruhe. Little product placement there. Apologies, but yeah, no, it's a concept that I'm fascinated with as well, and have been for some time. So I, back in 2010, 2011, I had noticed a real shift in the way people were starting to talk about sustainability and green building. And it seemed like there was a lot of agitation and interest in pushing in a different direction. We started to see living buildings emerging, for example, and deeper green products emerging. And I was having a discussion with Janine Benyus, that many of the people on the line might know, who really popularized the whole biomimicry field. And I was describing this sort of observed phenomenon that I was seeing of this sort of anxiousness and restlessness for change. And she said, oh, there's a word for that. And the word, and I mangle German all the time, but Zugenruhe is, you know, this word, a crazy word, and it means migratory restlessness. And it's a known phenomenon amongst most migratory, or maybe even all migratory species, species that basically travel to get the resources they need, that, as you might imagine, they have to prepare themselves for the change. They can't just, you know, decide, oh, tomorrow I'm going to fly 1,000 miles. They actually have to prepare their bodies physiologically, psychologically. So everything begins to change. They get agitated, literally. They have to, you know, change their diet, their sleep patterns, and they're preparing themselves for a great journey, a perilous journey in many cases. And I think that, you know, we as a species, if you look at our history, we followed the herds. You know, we traveled behind the migratory animals often. And I'm sure it's in our sort of DNA as well to have this same kind of sense when the world, and I think we're feeling it right now during this pandemic, not just the fear of the disease. I think there's something larger at play for people, and they don't even understand it. It's subconscious, and it is this sort of anticipatory preparation that society is about to make a migration. We're about to make a series of big changes. Hopefully we're going to, you know, respond to climate change appropriately now. Hopefully we're going to respond to the great economic inequalities in the world now in a different way. Let's hope. But what is happening right now is this sort of angst and the beginning of the sukunrua for the human animal. And we don't even realize we're going through it. We haven't migrated yet. We're still in the same place, and the resources are getting scarcer where we're at. Winter has come, and we are yet to migrate. And so that's where all this anxiousness is coming from. And that's what this book was essentially about was saying, if you want to be an agent of change, by definition, you're someone who has picked up on these energies earlier than others. You're somebody that wants to be the lead bird, or one of the lead birds that's taking off in its migration. And I think, again, that's the perfect role for designers to play. So I hope that wasn't too long-winded, but it's a subject I'm fascinated in.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, in terms of the context of nature, it's specifically a physical migration. In our case,
it's a metaphysical, spiritual migration in my mind as well. But yeah, it's a metaphor too. So
yeah. So how do we kind of cope with that? I mean, what are we planning for in terms of a migration? It's a change from a pattern, a way of living.
Yep. The stories have to, like, it's moving from the old stories to the new stories. That's why we've been talking about stories. It's old habits of how we work, how we live, and you have to go through this as you prepare for change. You have to go through a little bit of sort of almost like a depression. You have to it's loss. There's grief involved because something is dying, even though it needed to die. Something has to make way for something new to emerge. And that's where the anxiousness comes from. It's a realization that it's not all in your control, and it never was, that you have to let go and trust, and you have to step into the unknown, and you have to leave what you thought was the way it was before. And then you have to actually physically move in some way. Now, it might not mean moving to another city. I don't mean that kind of move, but move from your paradigm to this new paradigm. And
it's interesting watching the birds when they do that. They kind of gather in big flocks on the telegraph wires, or I guess the trees before we put wires up, and they're all kind of getting more and more restless. And suddenly, it only takes one or two.
Yeah, the leader.
And then the mass will all suddenly, they're ready, they'll all go. But it has to have those few lead birds to set it off, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's what we've got to do. We've got to kind of create the new paradigms. And for me, I mean, I really believe that those paradigms, those ways forward are actually there for us in many of the indigenous cultures. And this is what I've been talking about in the past, of changing our relationship with nature, with the land, to one that's much more in balance and respectful, and not exploitative. And I think there's the pattern is there for us in indigenous cultures.
Absolutely. And I always talk about it. It's like, our conception of self has to be changed. I like to refer to us evolving from Homo sapien to Homo regenesis, a species that understands that its role is as a steward and a co-creator in nature, and that it's regenerating the place that it's in, like other species do. And that kind of belief system is already found. It's been part of many cultures for many, many, millennia, but just not the dominant economic and, otherwise cultures that we have now.
And so you believe that by creating those sort of patterns in the way in which we design and things that we design, we're kind of shifting the paradigm, shifting the center of gravity of our culture.
We're helping in our small way to get the flock ready to migrate. And I don't know who or what or which groups are going to be the first birds to take off from the pond, but our job is to help get everyone ready. In sometimes small ways, and that's fine. And I think it can be, down to, little things in your life, and it can be very small because it's a shift, and suddenly you can't You can't put it back in the closet once you've made that shift. And that's what our job is to do, is to turn on those lights in those rooms for people.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of brings me to the kind of, I was going to end with a couple of inspiring thoughts that we could sort of offer up for people. And the one that I had of this time is that because we're in this situation where we're not safe anymore, we've always been very complacent because we're kind of, everything's okay and organized and we can do what we want and we have all that we need. Why would we want to change? But now we're not safe anymore, but things are changing. And so it's a time when, what have we got to lose? Why not take the step? Why not do something crazy? It's not like we're losing that safety because we've lost it already. And so I like to think that this is a moment of bravery, of stepping out and hopefully being those birds, starting the change in a way that sort of gets things moving.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would say that the safety has always been an illusion. And,
yeah.
and that life has never been in our control. And you can live in delusion, you can live in fear, or you can live in hope. And the important thing for me is not sort of covering one end of the spectrum up or the other, so that you acknowledge the things that are scary, the things that that make us feel unsafe, and you don't bury them or pretend they're not there, but you also don't let them bury you. And you don't let them, we're in this moment where I think, as you're saying, it's become more evident that we're not safe to more people that had a delusion. And that, has led to so much angst. But it's important that we don't, we have to acknowledge it, and we don't bury those feelings, but we don't let them overcome us. And there's a lot of people that are very, giving into it or reacting very, in the States, we have this sort of like, if you're wearing a mask or you don't wear a mask, and people are like, it's become this sort of ideological thing. And it's kind of missing the point in some ways on both sides of things, Anyway, it's another whole topic.
I was very taken with your honesty in your talk. I thought that was brave. Your honesty about yourself and what you're feeling and what you've gone through. And I think that's a great way to kind of generate trust, to get people to go with you, to show that you are human, you're not perfect. And I think there's a terrible pressure on people and designers, especially perhaps, to be aware of their kind of image, that they're very self-conscious about their image and trying to sort of make sure that it's right. And our age becomes so sort of self-conscious, narcissistic through all the kind of media that we use to project ourselves. And so I think it's great I was very touched by honesty in that talk about yourself. And
yeah, living future. We just had it. Yeah. Thank you.
So do you have any kind of final thoughts to round up with that you'd like to offer?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've kind of landed in a good place. I think that this is the year of perfect vision, as I said in that talk. Mm-hmm. This is, of which I don't have perfect vision anymore, as you know. I used to. In fact, I have it in one eye. But 2020, when you see 2020, you see things clearly. And this is the year 2020. And I think this is the year where I think it's going to have become more clear to enough people that we have to, migrate to a new paradigm. And so I think that sometimes life imitates art in interesting ways. And here we are at 2020, and I think it's becoming clear that this needs to be a new change for humanity. And we'll see whether we're up to it, whether enough of us, do 2 or 3 birds leave and the rest stay on the pond. We'll see. But I think enough of the birds on the pond know shit.
Yeah. I hope so. Yeah, I hope we're kind of past that critical mass when change will be inevitable. Yeah.
Great. Well, great to be with you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much for your time and your thoughts and all that you've given over the years. It's been a wonderful example, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think if John wants to take over and handle any questions, we're still going to stay online a little bit to answer any questions that people might want to throw through.
Sure, thank you, Jason, and thank you, David. We've answered a couple of things. I've been in the chat room, if you would. I don't see a whole lot of Q&A right now, but as I said at the top of the call, we will pull together some answers to the main questions that were submitted if we hadn't talked about those topics. And then also we will send out a full recording of this talk. We'd like to share it with others. And we noticed that there was a bit of a glitch with some people logging in. So anyone on the call, if you have colleagues that couldn't get in or what have you, we will take care of that in terms of sending out the recording of this talk. But I don't see any impending questions, David and Jason, so I think we can probably wrap it up.
John, were there any questions that you had sent in prior that we haven't addressed?
I think, I would possibly mention the Living Building Challenge as Jason was talking about, and well building. Those are two constructs, two programs that designers can access and sort of put some of those principles of bringing nature indoors, natural patterns, good product, materials that don't have VOCs, red list free, what have you. There's way more to it than that, but some of those things that you were touching on, which are a bit more conceptual or direction, those can be put into action through well building and living building and challenge. And you don't have to, this may not please Jason exactly, but you don't have to have every project be well certified to make it, well designed. So you can take the principles from well certification or living building challenge and integrate those into any design, because there are some constraints with certification and cost and time and all those sort of things, but you can still use good materials, good product in every project. So, but other specific questions, not really. I think we've covered a few, and we will make sure with the wrap up after this that anything outstanding I'll cover. I will have a look. Oh, excuse me. So there we go. So Dean would like to know your lemons to lemonade moment. So David, I don't know if that's an expression that is in New Zealand culture. I'm a Kiwi, but I've been Americanized. So lemons to lemonade is basically making something good out of a bad situation. I was kind of touched. We had a lot of people that were feeling much more connected with their families, siblings and spouses and partners and what have you, just because we've been forced to get together. So I think myself, quality time with my kids. We've been going on bike rides and cooking and doing all sorts of things. I personally have been focused a bit more on food and good food. So working with a local community farm, they call it a CSA here. Others have taken more time for themselves, which I thought was interesting. Just taking time out, reading a book. We can't always do that. I think people are possibly more busy than they've ever been. So anyway, Dean is asking if you've had a particular aha moment or a lemons to lemonade moment that this situation has created that you want to continue with.
Jason?
Well, if we're talking about the current situation, I think, John's right. It's been interesting how I think, people are spending obviously more time with their families at their house. They're exercising. They're focused on, people are making more bread. I think it's going to be hard from a habit standpoint for people to be back on planes all the time again, for those that did that, or on the road, or I think that people are rediscovering what it means to slow down that we've forgotten over the last 20, 30 years. So it's been interesting to see that shift in so many people.
Yeah, I love to see it. I've met so many people who said, actually, I really enjoyed this time. And even when you have a holiday, you have this sort of pressure to have a holiday, to go and do it, whereas you can't even do that. You're just here. And I think that's one of the I think that more than anything else, I think that's what I've heard people talking about, that they're gained out of this. And I think we come back to sort of where we started when the talk about sort of homes and the importance of homes. And it's made me think that possibly certainly in the near future, we're going to be directing our product line more towards residential than we have in the past, and less towards commercial. There'll be less offices because people can't get to work because there's not room on the public transport with the physical distancing we have. So they can't, even if they want to go to work, they can't. And restaurants and as well, commercial spaces. So I think that we're going to be seeing a shift in what we do with our work and where it's being sold, much more towards the residential. And I think that's a good thing, because I think there's a more personal connection with the work that people get in their homes than they do in a business. So I like to see that.
Jason, we had a question about the Living Food Challenge. That's new to me, actually. But is that something, is that another one of your Jason projects that you seem to keep adding to the world in a good way? So maybe you can talk a little bit about the Living Food Challenge. As I said, because of scarcity, but also just trying to do the right thing, my relationship with food and local farms and going to farmers markets and things like that has changed. So I don't know if the Living Food Challenge is related to that in any way, but if you could maybe comment on that, that would be cool, please.
Yeah, no, it is, it's a program that is in beta development with the Living Future Institute, and I see that you have the link to living-future.org. And it is a program that we wrote to be in the same sort of vein or spirit of the Living Building Challenge, but looking at food, in particular food systems. So whether you're a restaurateur or you are a farmer or a distributor, how you grocer, baker, brewer, how do you create food that is part of a living framework? And there's a lot of people that know how to do that. But there's most of our industrial food system is on the other opposite end of that extreme. So in the same way that we began to codify, well, what does a regenerative living building mean? How do we measure that? That was what the Living Building Challenge was. And then we followed it up with the Living Product Challenge to say, well, here's what it means for things in our lives. The Food Challenge is intended to sort of frame those issues for our food systems. So it's not yet a fully active program. I think the Institute's looking for funding for it as a nonprofit. But it would be amazing if you really knew, whether you were buying food, how it really impacted the world, and not just the nutrition label, or not just whether it said organic or not, but the whole host of issues that surround our food supply chain was transparently disclosed, so that you really see the difference in impacts to habitat, to other species, to watersheds, to waste, as well as to health and nutrition, which we tend to have more data on in our food systems now. And so imagine that you knew you could compare 2 buckets of something, or 2 bushels of corn, or 2 hunks of cheese, and one of them is part of this powerfully regenerative economic and ecological system, and the other one is factory farmed and isn't good for the cows and isn't good for you and isn't good for the land that it's on, but has really great marketing and uses some interesting words, but is not actually doing what we want it to do. And I think that's what we need more. I think most people want to do the right thing, but they don't have information, and they don't have it presented in a way where it's not information if you have to be a PhD, level person to do the research to decide which thing is better. It needs to be, the world needs to be curated to a large degree, embedded, and be defendable and transparent. And my vision for the Living Future Institute is to do that with every part of society.
We've been working on Declare for our products, and one of the things that came up, which possibly is missing, is it's a bit like what you're talking about with the food, about where the farm, what the farmer's like, where the food came from, how the farmer treats the land. It doesn't seem within the product that you've got enough of the treatment of the people who are involved in making that. Like, yes, it's got no chemicals in it, but was it created with slave labor in Africa?
Yeah, well, that's why you got to do the whole living product challenge, because the Declare protocol is sort of I call it a sub-tool. It's looking at a slice of the issues only. And if you want the whole pie, the living product challenge is the whole pie. And Declare is like it's revealing one slice of the whole. And because you're right, it doesn't look at all the issues, but it was meant to be kind of like a first step to get a lot of manufacturers and designers of products to accept the idea that transparency was a good thing. It wasn't that long ago that you couldn't get any manufacturers to disclose anything about what was in their products other than what they were forced to by law. And people thought it was all about trade secrets. Well, I can't tell you what's in my paint. And
but that's also a problem we come up against, because we often our suppliers won't tell us what's in the product because it's, quote, trade secret.
Exactly. That's the world we need to upend. That's why Declare existed. That was the theory of change model for Declare, was to poke a hole in that process. And we knew it was going to be really hard at first, because it's all these sort of veil of secrecy up the supply chain. But it's starting to work. I mean, it really is starting to work as intended, where more and more companies realize that the ingredients in their products are not that secret, to begin with, and that it's actually better for them to know what's going on than to be ignorant of it. So it's starting to work.
I mean, I strongly believe that what we've tried to do is be honest. So not just saying, "Oh, this is really good because of this," but also it's got that which is not so good. There's some bad aspect, and telling the whole story.
Exactly.
Even though it might not sound so good in terms of you're actually pointing out to the bad side, I think it's far more important to be honest and let the people make their own decisions, and then they'll respect you and trust you more.
That's exactly right. See, I wish everyone had your attitude. Yep. I think people don't want to disclose things unless they've reached perfection already. And it goes back against, it's like nobody's perfect and you're never going to get to perfect. And so, that honesty and transparency is huge, because, if you're going to get to perfect, it's because the whole supply chain, the whole community shifted together. That's the migration. Mm-hmm. One manufacturer can't clean up the world themselves. They can shrink their footprint to a certain point, but a footprint remains. And what we need are these sort of positive handprints, where as groups of manufacturers, groups of designers, we change the industry together. It can't be changed alone. And then systemically, we can have a world of better products and better cities, better buildings, as a whole. And it's the mental shift, the migration, the paradigm has to begin again, as you're already saying, because you have to be okay where you are. You have to be honest about it, and you have to then do whatever you can do, disclose what you can disclose, change what you can change, and be honest about what you haven't figured out how to do. And then as a community, we can solve that together, those barriers. So.
Yeah.
Sorry,
John.
I was just going to say we're hitting the top of the hour, and other people might have to bounce off. So I don't want to cause stress. We may have to have a part 2 of this talk in July. We'll let it percolate a little bit. So thank you very much. I don't know if you have any final thoughts, but I think we should just wrap up. I know it's hard to address every need and every topic, but we're getting some nice feedback, and maybe we will have a part 2 later on in the year, because this really is a continuation of a conversation you guys have been having for a while. more of us are now aware of it, just because of practical and experience that we're all seeing. So it's good, but it's a conversation and a process that needs to keep going, for sure.
Great. Great. Thanks, John, and thanks, David. And thanks to everyone.
Thanks very much, Jason.
All right.
Kakitiano. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.